Take this. Now I gotta turn my back.
$3,200. That's what he gave me. $3,200 for a lifetime.
So there were a lot of, unknowns coming out of the pandemic shutdown. Where sales going to come back, where a bunch of the comic stores going to shut down. How were they going to adapt to the new market? Obviously, DC is putting out less comics. Marvel initially was only putting out comics every other week. It seems like they're kind of getting back to normal. DC is definitely going to have a slimmed down line. Image has maintained a slimmed down line. Things have changed a little bit. Digital is coming more to the forefront. We're seeing that sales of manga and YA graphic novels are eclipsing, sales of traditional Western comic book trades and things like that. And one of my good friends, he is a writer, obviously associated with Darkwing Duck, Tokyo Pop, some other. I think he did the Boom Kids line, where it's all the Disney stuff. So yep. He's worked professionally in the industry a lot, but he also works. Is it for 2 or 3 shops?
2.
2 shops.
Well,
and
you three shops total, 2 chains.
Okay, so you work for 3 shops total. You kind of do the ordering, kind of keep things in place, and so I thought maybe you would have a good idea, or could give just your anecdotal evidence on what the comic book market looks like coming out, because we've been getting really divergent opinions or just divergent pieces of evidence. Some people say, sales are up. Some people are like, no, sales are really depressed. I think maybe it has to do with regionally. Obviously, you're in California. Yep. So I am going to speak to Aaron Sparrow, the author of Darkwing Duck, among other wonderful comic books. How you doing, Aaron?
I'm doing great.
So, what has your experience been? I know, obviously, you're working for the owners of these shops. You have to keep sales up. Rent is still due, I'm imagining. Have you had to make any changes to your ordering as far as comic books? Is there anything hot right now versus, or is there anything like specifically cold?
The hottest thing in any shop right now is Cara Dune action figures. That's the number one thing that's getting asked that we're getting asked for. But as far as comics go, sales, at least for the shops that I deal with, have been depressed. They're Southern California shops, and this is really kind of hit the industry hard. This whole pandemic and everything else that's going on. The sales were already sliding downward, but this has really taken a hit. A lot of people, once the lockdown happened, did not come back. We've had a lot of canceled pulls, a lot of things that have affected just even walk-in traffic for comics has been lessened, and we're taking some steps to try to mitigate that and try to make it more exciting. We've completely revamped our back issue section at one store. There's a lot of things that we're doing just to make it more browsable and more shoppable. A lot of things that we're doing to kind of try to combat that. But the fact of the matter is, a lot of people had their weekly habit broken, and they're not coming in seeking out the books. A lot of people have, still have lost their jobs because, California has been one of the states that's got one of the strictest lockdowns. A lot of our customers at one store are from, we're Disney employees. So obviously, they're all out of work, all the park employees. So they're not coming in and spending money. So it's been a really challenging time.
So you mentioned something interesting. We certainly heard that not just here on the channel from Paley, but other anecdotal evidence, throughout the industry. It seems like comic shops that were well stocked and equipped to supply back issues have been in a much healthier state than comic shops that were basically relying on revenue and income generated from new comic issues. And you said one of the shops is kind of retooled their inventory to kind of become more of a back issue shop.
Yeah, to really focus on that, buying up collections, selling back issues. That seems to be where the interest is, because I think that comics has failed to reach new readers. I think the initiatives that they've put in place since 2015, 2016, where they've kind of pushed away their older readers, the ones who were loyal, in favor of this new phantom audience that they thought was going to materialize just by simply shouting, diversity from the rooftops, that all these people were going to come in and buy these stories. That hasn't happened. All these people that on Twitter are all day talking about the things that they want in comics and how they want comics to change, and they want comics to be representative and things like that. And I don't think that there's anything wrong with, if you're a consumer, saying these are the things that I'd like to see. but they're not showing up with any money and buying these things. So maybe they don't have any money. Maybe they're just not interested in comics. They're only interested in kind of taking control of the comics culture. We can have those
Well, I
debates
think
all day.
another issue, I don't mean to interrupt, but I think another issue is I think there are some writers out there that think just because you have a new diverse character, that is the selling point. And they've lost the message that you can have the most diverse, character lineup ever for a comic book. But if you don't have a compelling story, no one has a compelling reason to come back. And I think that's been lost. People want to celebrate. They think, oh, I created a diverse character roster. Well, you haven't done anything yet because you haven't created that story. That's only the first step. And they think they've made it when you actually have to go out there and deliver a good, comprehensive story. I don't think having like a diverse range of characters in a story would preclude anyone from coming in and reading it. I think it's the art quality and the story quality. And I think that's what's really lacking.
That's absolutely right. I mean, as much as we like to act like diversity just happened in the last few years in comics, it's always been there. We've always had, diverse teams and diverse characters. One of my favorite books in the 90s was Silver Sable and the Wild Pack. And that was a very diverse cast. And that actually had, I think, the first openly lesbian character in a comic book. And Gregory Wright was writing the book, and it was done right. He had all these different characters from different backgrounds, different viewpoints, and he would write them as such. And it made the mix more interesting because it wasn't just this character is this. They were a fully developed, well-rounded character with their own viewpoint, their own hopes and fears and aspirations and flaws. And he would work that all into the story. And that's what diversity should be. It should be making the story more rich, more viewpoints, more things that we can kind of bounce off of each other. That's where I think diversity would be a strength in comic books. But we're only getting kind of the surface diversity where people say like, hey, like I've invented the first character, I've come up with the first character that represents X, and that's as far as they go with that character. Well, that's not interesting. I mean, neat, but that we now have a character for that for the people that want to feel represented by that character. But go the extra mile and make that character representative in the sense that it is a fully developed character that people can look at and be proud of, not just kind of the surface traits slapped into your comic so that you can get internet internet backpats. Everything.
Do you think that modern writers ever conceived of the idea that they would be competing with the writers from 20 years ago, and that they would be essentially be losing because those writers were focused more on immersive storytelling experiences, and it doesn't feel like maybe this generation, obviously there are creators who have put that at the forefront. For the most part, it feels to be lacking across the board.
I mean, I can't imagine that they, I don't know how much comic history they know just based on some of the writing that I'm seeing out there. A lot of the modern writers, I don't know how much of a passion they have for this or for the past stories. It seems incongruous to me, the idea that you have this passion for these past stories, but then you also want to come in and destroy those past stories with new stories. I think that if you're really in love with comics, you're going to honor the past, and you're going to use that past as a building block, as your foundation to build something new and interesting, while still, honoring the things that came before because you love them so much. I think that those are the type of writers that we need.
Like Donny Cates, not my favorite person in the world, but that's pretty much what he does when he comes onto a title. You can tell he knows the legacy of the title. He knows the character histories. He goes and does some interesting things that maybe you hadn't considered in the past. Right now we're seeing, it was Donald Blake, has been awakened from slumber. Thor's, stuck down there, and he's, he went nuts while he was in sleep. Interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, Donny clearly, no matter what you think of Donny personally, as a creator, as a writer, his love of these characters and of these stories that kind of shaped him, it comes through in his work. I've often said about, people ask me about Donny Cates' work. I said, I don't know if this might not appeal to you, but this is how I view his work, is I see him as like taking these figures or these characters like action figures and kind of smashing them together and being like, wouldn't it be cool if, and really like kind of projecting a lot of imagination into that. so yeah, his love comes through, and that's one of the things that Silvani and I have always been complimented on in our Darkwing Duck run, is that clearly our love of Disney and of the Darkwing Duck show and what came before that all comes through. And that's an enthusiasm, I think, that you want to hook your readers into. Because if they're coming to read the book, they obviously have an enthusiasm for the character. They have a love of it. And when you show them that you share that love, it connects you to them and it connects them to your stories. And I don't think that there's enough of that in the industry right now.
So let's talk about a little bit about DC. We'll talk about DC, Marvel, then we'll talk about maybe some indie trends. We'll talk about new comics now. You've already said that, moving into backstock was a good move for at least one of the shops that you work for. Now, DC coming out of the pandemic, obviously they got new distribution going up. From what I've heard across the board, people are very happy with Lunar, at least at this point. It's like the Cadillac of comic book distribution. Like, apparently they're never damaged. If they are damaged, you get replacements early. You get them well in time. So that part has been good. It felt like they came out guns blazing. You had Batman 3 Jokers. You had Batman Joker War. You had Dark Knight's Death Metal. And there was a lot of big tentpole titles for people to come back into the shop and get from DC Comics. And it felt like they were able to do that.
Yeah, they really did come out with some high profile stuff. Batman 3 Jokers was phenomenal for us in sales. Joker War, lesser, but still solid. And then, it's kind of, when you have one book that kind of hooks people in, like 3 Jokers, it gets people buying the other Batman books, then maybe the Batman books, hey, maybe Superman was in this issue. Oh, well, maybe I'll pick up Batman Superman too and find out what's going on there. And then maybe they get into the Superman books and then they read Bendis' story and they get right back out. But I couldn't help that little dig there. But that is what happens, is it kind of, you have an introductory book that's a big book that people are curious about and they check out, and then that tentpole story, and then they wander off into the other books and checking out the other titles. And so DC came out really strong with that when they switched over to Lunar, and you're absolutely right. Lunar distribution has been great. The discount's not as deep. Had to compensate a little bit for that, but the books they arrive perfect. The distribution is fantastic. You get them early. It's really nice. And Diamond still has not stepped up their game to meet Lunar. I'm still just getting, Marvel and Image and, indie titles from Diamond just thrown into the box, with no real protection. All the Lunar stuff is like, there's bubble wrap all around, they're placed in there so that the spacing is perfect. It's fantastic. And Diamond could really learn a few things from them, but refuses to.
So obviously, once specifically Dark Knight's Death Metal is over, by that time Batman 3 Jokers is over, Batman Joker War, although James Tynion's Batman run is going to continue, it's just on hiatus. But coming out of Dark Knight's Death Metal, we've got the new Omniverse, a new way of thinking about the DC multiverses, and we've gone into Future State, which is going to lead into Infinite Frontier. We know that Future State has been more successful than DC anticipated, but we also know they did not anticipate to be successful very much at all. Like, what has your experience been as far as interest in Future State? And are DC readers that maybe skipped out on Future State, are they ready to come back for Infinite Frontier?
Well, that's my big worry, is that Future State was a jumping off point for people, for a lot of readers. Like, I don't know who's going to come back. Even Tynion's run on Batman, I don't know how many readers are going to come back after the fact, because with the pandemic, you've already had, a point where people have kind of broken their habit. And then DC gave them another one with Future State. So while there is there is more interest in Future State, I think, than they anticipated, we've not been able to move as many Future State issues as we did of the regular DC titles. It's actually made sales softer for us. So, I'm very curious how we're going to come out of this. It's really tough to have a line break like that, especially in these times, and expect people to come back. We've had customers drop away. We've seen a few new customers come in, but mostly that's because the other shop, one of the shops, there was a competing shop, two competing shops, and over the course of the last several months, they've dropped out. They've gone away, and we still have not seen the bump in customer base that you would think that you would get with two shops closing. So I think that people just I think we're at a time where people just find it really easy to walk away. The books are expensive. They're getting more expensive with DC. They've got like $8, $7 books. They're transitioning to a lot of 100-page, giants that are just going to have backup filler material. It's not like you're getting all new content.
Also, Batman, Superman, Justice League, all of those are going to have backup stories when they come up in Infinite Frontier and cost $1 more.
Yeah,
even though it's probably a story you didn't want to begin with.
Exactly, and it's going to be and probably from a writer that you're not particularly fond of, because that's just kind of the way that it's going, or a writer that said nasty things on the internet that's turned you off. I hope that now I do see some new talent coming in. Like I saw that Ann Toole is going to be on doing some DC work, which I think is good. Her Horizon Zero Dawn series over at Titan has been a good seller for us. And I've actually met her. She's a very nice person, in my interactions with her. So I think they are bringing in some talent that has a chance to do something. Hopefully, they've got the strong enough editorial to work with them and really make those books a success, and they'll be marketed well. But yeah, just anytime you give a jumping off point, it's always worrisome to retailers. And there's so many jumping off points, this in the course of the last year that I know a lot of shops are really hurting. So
how the pull list looking for DC? Are people ready for Infinite Frontier, or you think they're just waiting to see what the reaction is?
Yeah, I think they're waiting. We haven't had a lot of people add the new DC or the DC titles to their list. They've got their hardcore audience that sticks with them. Unfortunately, we haven't lost those yet. But yeah, it's a really, really tough and interesting time. But most people, Pele, absolutely right. Most people are seeking out back issues. They want to reconnect with the things that gave them that love of comics to begin with, that they don't feel like they're getting from current comics. So I think that's why you're seeing back issues skyrocket. I think that's why you're seeing key issues. People are buying them up because they've realized, I really want to have these in my collection. Why am I spending all this money on new books that I don't enjoy as much when I can go in and I can fill out my runs? So even the people that have dropped away from, their pull lists and things like that and coming into weekly comics, I think that a lot of them are probably still just turning that money into back issues instead.
Yeah, I think, ultimately entertainment for the most part should be about escapism. And, I think people are turning to back issues for that. Now, let's kind of look over at Marvel. They were a little bit different. They were much more cautious coming out the pandemic. Obviously, they're still with Diamond. They had like that weird release schedule. They're going to release periodic trades. I think they did that for 6 to 8 weeks, something like that. They're kind of getting back to normal. The first event they had coming out was Empire. Did better than they anticipated. I think that was because people hadn't had new comics, I think, in 6 or 7 weeks by that point. Ten of Swords, from what I can see, and from the numbers and just the reaction from the audience, is that it was too long. It wore people out. It was too discombobulated. It did not make sense as a functional, integrated story with the stuff going on in Otherworld, the stuff going on with Krakoa and Arakko. Now, obviously, we're into King in Black now. That one seems to be received well. Have the Marvel fans come back, and are they happy with the nonstop event cycle?
Well, Ten of Swords, Empire did not do well for us. It didn't. I think it did well for Marvel. I think that shops bought a lot of copies, but when I go and I visit other shops, I'm seeing a lot of those in the dollar bin now. So I don't think that I think shops overordered. I don't think that readers were there for that. I think they are worn out by events. I know that Ten of Swords really killed the momentum of the X books for us. Our sales on X books during House of X and Powers of X, and even into the beginning of Dawn of X, were very, very high. And now they've kind of like fallen back to those pre-Hickman levels. I think people are getting out. I think there's too many books. I think there's too many that don't matter to people. We can't sell like X Factor. You put that eyeball kid on the cover, as your big image. That's not drawn in any readers. It's just not a dynamic looking character. He looks goofy and unsettling, and it's not something that moves books. I think that the direction that they're going in is going to kill the line. And it seems like, I think you've done a few videos on it. It seems like Hickman is kind of like checked out, and it's just falling to. I don't want to use the word lesser, but less well-known, less talented writers, or just younger writers.
Less experienced writers, as far as handling something that big. Hickman's got a lot of experience doing that.
Yeah, he definitely does. And I think that if he was really invested in it and was really passionate about it, I think that we'd be getting a really good core title. Like the way that he built the Secret Wars, I always really liked, and I liked Secret Wars as a crossover. I think, and I don't think we've had a strong crossover since. Absolute Carnage kind of broke a lot of people because Marvel expanded it into so many titles, and that seems to be happening with King and Black with our readers. We've had a couple people who said they want to pick up the tie-ins and have added it to their pull list, but sales on those other titles have not been strong, and it's as a shop, you just have to decide where to put your money, and you can't keep putting it into, hey, King and Black, now Spider-Gwen's going to have a 3-issue limited series that takes place within King and Black, and there's going to be a Thunderbolts 3-issue that takes place in King of Black, and they launch all these extra titles to try and grab onto those dollars, and a lot of shops feel compelled to at least order a few of every copy. And we've kind of gotten away from that. Like, we don't order every title anymore. You put out a bunch of things that are going to be, done in 3 issues and are going to tie into the, the main King and Black story tangentially. We're not going to order them if people don't put them on their pull.
They can get it with the omnibus.
Yep.
So that's kind of the way Marvel's going. I don't see that changing. It's going to be flood the shelves. It's going to continue to be, high interest in variants, reboots, and events going forward. It's the Marvel way until they make some wholesale changes here. What's been really interesting and definitely the most promising thing that we've seen coming out of the pandemic is the upshoot as far as sales of the core big titles in indie comics. We saw the sales for TMNT: The Last Ronin. Obviously that's a miniseries from IDW. Amazing sales. We saw initial sales for Berserker, going to be the most ordered comic issue since 2015. Over 600,000 issues for Berserker #1. Obviously, it did get delayed a little bit, but when it comes there, that's what the sales are. What was it? Department of Truth, I think, was over 100,000. Was it? We Only Find Them When They're Dead, over 100,000. We're seeing sales on some of the other titles keep rising up. There's Something's Killing the Children have been doing very well. I think the sales on Undiscovered Country have been rising, as well as Decorum. So it feels like the indie comics are really getting hotter and hotter, while interest in Marvel and DC
are the sales
peters
rising?
off.
Are the sales rising on those titles though? Because I don't know of any way to track it anymore. It's certainly not evident in now. In some, they are. Obviously, TMNT: The Last Ronin did very well for us. We Only Find Them When They're Dead is a good title for us. Something Is Killing the Children, another good title for us. I think those titles have a good hook in the actual name of the book that makes people go, wait, what is this about? And they want to check it out. And then, if it's a good story and it's got some decent art, so it draws people in, they stick with it. And I think that's kind of the thing that needs to be focused on. But as far as Undiscovered Country, we're down to, I know at 2 of the shops, we're down to one shelf copy a month. And maybe like 1 or 2 pulls. I don't think that's resonating with people. Decorum hasn't really seemed to catch on at our shops. But, obviously every shop is different. There's going to be some shops where you're going to have people that are really excited about it, in
I
that
think
area.
Crossover was doing like 120 on its 3rd issue because there was Spawn on the cover.
Yeah, that Spawn issue sold really well. It sold better than, people bought it because Spawn was on the cover, and then we had a couple of people who bought a couple issues because each of the covers were different. But those are variant cover schemes. They don't translate necessarily to
Secret variants.
Yeah, so you can jump in for that quick hit and give yourself some breathing room with some of the money, but if you can't hook them in with the story and the art, then you're pretty much dead in the water. I know some people who've dropped Crossover already because they're just like, this isn't what I thought it was going to be, and I don't really have interest in what it is. So we've lost some sales there. Then there's some hardcore Donny Cates fans that are just buying it because it's got Donny Cates' name on the title that we have in our shop. And I'm like, what do you think of the story? And they're like, oh, I just bagged it and put it in my collection. So you've got some of those too. So yeah, it's really interesting the way that people buy comics and the different ways that they approach it. There's some people who just buy them out of habit, bag them in boredom, and put them away, and don't read the story, which to me is just really, really sad and depressing. Like, it's like, man.
What do you think the fallout's going to be of DC cutting all their costs by getting rid of like kind of long-term, more higher profile creators like Jeff Johns and Gary Frank have a series that's going to be coming out at Image. Obviously, Scott Snyder and Tony Daniel have a new series coming out at Image. We're seeing a lot of these creators that were high profile at DC brought in a tremendous amount of numbers. Do you think that's going to translate over to indies since we're seeing the sales come out there, or do you think it's not sustainable?
No, I think it'll translate over for indie success. I think that, losing Jeff Johns and, when we talk about the big events that kind of propelled DC after the pandemic, Three Jokers was the biggest one. So them cutting ties with Jeff Johns and him going off and doing his own thing, I think it'll be I think whatever he does, it'll be very successful. I think that Scott Snyder's new book with Tony Daniels is going to be successful. It's going to make them, a decent amount of money, and I think that it'll make shops a decent amount of money. But the problem is there's that looming threat of DC is cutting talented people. They're hiring more unknowns. We don't know what the quality is going to be. Cost cutting always leads to a drop in quality, and a drop in quality always leads to a drop in pulls. So it's going to be a really hard time for
the long-standing characters that bring people into the shop along with Marvel.
Well, I think that's what DC is banking on. Is they're thinking, I think not DC necessarily themselves, but I think their parent company and the way that it's like being trimmed down is, well, the IP is what matters. It's not the creators that matter. And I think that Marvel has kind of had that attitude for a while too. But people will drop a book if they don't enjoy it. And there's only so many people that'll just keep collect Amazing Spider-Man whether they like it or not. Because they've got to complete their run. There's only so many of those people that are that hardcore. And we'll hit a point where it's not sustainable for the big two. And if either one of the big two drops out, that will drastically affect the market. And I don't know that these indie books will be able to survive without that larger umbrella. I hope that they can. I hope that this is a transition where we're going to see more indie companies coming to the forefront and readers coming in for those books, instead of Marvel or DC being the driving factor that gets a person into the store. If the industry can make that transition, then Marvel and DC won't matter as much. There'll just be other companies that are publishing corporate comics. But I don't know. I don't know how much time we have and if we can make that transition. But I hope that with these big creators moving over to the independents, I hope that we can do that. I hope that this might, there might be a slim chance that this is actually a renaissance for the comic book industry. And that's my hope.
Well, thanks for kind of running down what you've seen as far as what, doing your orders for 3 Comic Shop and stuff like that. Aaron, is there anything else, like some parting words you wanted to just say on the subject before we kind of wrap this up?
Well, I'll just tell my own personal experience, my own personal collecting. I have largely stopped buying new issues. I am picking up, I did pick up 3 Jokers, which I really enjoyed, picking up TMNT, The Last Ronin. There's indie books that I'm checking out. But for the most part, I'm one of those customers who has transitioned from, well, the money that I spent on comics, I am now spending on other things. So, on new issues, don't really have a budget for that anymore. Now I spend it on, indie comics crowdfunding and indie comics on the shelf and back issues. I've transitioned into, well, I'm gonna start. This is a good time to start filling out my back issue runs of the books I really care about. So I'm one of those guys. I'm one of those back issue hunters now.
Well, there you go. Thank you so much for sharing this information, and we'll talk to you next week, buddy.
All right, man. Thanks for having me on, Wes.